Doesn't need much explanation, does it? Interesting thought I want to propose to you here that I don't want you to miss in this video. What he's postulating is, when he opens the scene, is that history was created by God. Not just the universe, not just the earth, not just the heavens, but history itself was created by God. What does he mean by this? Well, certainly we would talk about the idea that he has written a play, that God has written a document upon which history relies. History is the outflowing of God's creative design and his decretive will. He allows within that, his will, rebellion and opposition. But no opposition can counter what God has decreed, because he is God. And then you subset that with the fact that he is good, so that the rejection of good, you get the benefit of that which is evil. This is good tree, bad tree, which we opened with in the fall. The good tree and the bad tree. Follow God. In Moses' day, we hear the blessings. We disobey God and rebel against him, and there are curses. This theme runs through history. To Adam and Eve, it was don't eat the tree. And we see them eating the tree. And then they get the consequences of eating the tree. And you follow from Adam and Eve down through the whole lineage of human beings. And we find the same scenario. He ends with this incredible thought that the very act of rebellion against God doesn't destroy God. It destroys the person who rebels against God. Because of inherent truth. Inherent truth. God is good. To reject him is to die. Don't eat the tree, or you will die. We fully understand this, do we not? We understand this in this class. I'm going to make a guess. 100% of you believe that. The question isn't then whether or not it's true for most of us. The question is, are we going to apply that truth? Will I come to those decisions in life, raising a family, running a business, overseeing a church? Will I come to the different questions of life in the daily walk of my existence and believe this and put it into practice? How would I know that and do that? By turning to his word, to search the scriptures, to found my decisions upon the text of scripture. That's God speaking to us. And if I really believe this, then I will turn to God's word. And to the best of our ability, trusting in the Spirit of God to lead us into the truth, predicate our decisions upon God's word. In the face of opposition from the world, ridicule from the world, perhaps sometimes in the face of opposition from your own family, sometimes in the face of opposition from your spouse or your children, and most of the time in opposition from that old nature that you have to deal with, and my old nature which I have to deal with, to, by an act of our will, to put our trust and faith in God. Those are the questions. He also follows this, and let me add a footnote to this too, that as a father or a husband, there will come those times, gentlemen, when you know that the decisions you're going to have to make for your family, they're the right decisions, and you've talked it over with your wife, and you come to these decisions. Sometimes you will even find yourself standing alone, maybe even against your wife, maybe even against your children, in making decisions that are not popular at that moment. But you will make them and stand strong. And that is the call upon a husband. That's the call upon a father. That's that extra responsibility that we have as we spiritually lead our families. And you say, what do you mean, Pastor Don? Well, you might try and do devotions. You might try and lead your family in prayer. You might say, we're going to go to church today or tonight to a special service when everybody else is doing this or doing that. and you'll hear your children, "Oh, Dad, we don't want to do that. Do we have to do this?" You might be taking a vacation and say to your family, "We're going to have our own little church service this morning." "Oh, we don't have much time then to go to the park or where we're going today." And you'll feel that resistance, okay? Most of the time, of course, it's not your wife or your family. Most of the time, it's your inner self, the old you that's saying, "You don't really do that. You'll look silly." And by the way, there's a great temptation to look silly when it comes to leading your family spiritually. It's a very difficult thing. And as I look at my life, that's one of the areas of failure in my life, to not lead as spiritually as I should have led. We trust we lead our families by example, and of course, but these are tough issues. Then he really spends time on this idea of pulling down boundaries. This is a philosophical thought. Think about it. When I say philosophical thought, I'm talking about a way of thinking. There's biblical philosophy, biblical psychology. We call it bibliopsychology. How do you deal with the mind and behavior from biblical principles, psychology? And philosophy. How do you deal with the study of thought? And you come to sequential thinking, and you come to principle thinking by going back to God's Word. There's a philosophical thought that we're talking about here, I think, where he talks about pulling down boundaries. When we pull down a boundary, we have to ask the question, why was that offense put up here to start? Okay? And that's a simple question, but it's a profound one. When we think about the idea of pulling down boundaries, I want to give to you this thought too, that generally speaking, here's what I think we find in history, in the sequence of history, that one generation will have boundaries, and the next generation will almost always have less boundaries than the previous generation. Okay? It's pretty amazing. It might be good and healthy for you sometime before you leave school here to, you maybe don't want to put your name on it in case somebody finds the paper. You may want to be clandestine about it. You may want to be very confidential about it. Simply because there's a reason for that. Not because you're hiding what your views are, but because you know your views are going to change, and you know when you write them down, you may think about them and say, that's not what I really believe. And so it gives you opportunity to cross it out and work on that list without somebody trying to interfere with your personal process, with your own soul, and with God, trying to find what your views are. But take a piece of paper and write down what your boundaries are. I'll make you a promise. What promise would I make first? What warning promise would I make? If you don't decide, somebody help me? If you don't decide,
somebody else will.
Pardon?
Somebody else will.
Somebody else will. That's why I didn't think of it that way, but Alexa, I agree 100%. If you don't make if you don't make your boundaries, somebody else will. Give me how that works out. That's the pressure of peer pressure of going with the crowd. I dare you to do this. A dare to a person is to get them to change their boundary. Normally you wouldn't do that. That's your boundary. Somebody dares you, or the double dare, or the triple dare, whatever that means. I have no idea what that means. I think what it means is, if you don't do this, I'm going to embarrass you even more. That's what a dare is. I dare you to do this, and if you don't do it, then there's something wrong with you. Something errant in you. You're not a man, you're a sissy, or you're not a woman, or really, what is a dare? It's a dare for you to change your boundaries. So, if you don't do it, as Alexa said, somebody else will. Here's what I was thinking, and I add this to what Alexa said. If you don't set your boundaries, you don't have any boundaries. If you don't set your boundaries, you don't have any boundaries. If you, let me put it in application, if you wait and say, I'll make up my mind at that moment, some of you are shaking your heads no. Why? You see the inherent danger of that, do you not? Because what you're really saying is, you'll let the circumstances, the situation, determine what your reaction will be. Okay, now think about this we talk a lot about the sexual activity of human beings, and these were my classes, because it happens to be one of the largest areas of temptation for young people. But it's not just that. It could be the temptation to steal, to take, to fudge on something like that, or to fudge in your heart, to harbor a little bit of bitterness towards someone, but you're certainly not going to go too far. So you'll smile to them, but inside there's this little twinge of bitterness or hatred towards them. When we allow that to happen, we open the floodgates to other things taking place. When we say, I'm not going to decide that now, I'll wait till the situation. You wait to make a decision on a sexual level and say, I'll decide that when something tempts me. But then you're already caught up into infatuation or some physical moment. It's too late. Okay? You make the same decisions, well, I like that person, but I really don't like them and they hurt me. But you cover it up. Then when you bump into them, that anger can come to the surface. An evil anger, a bad anger, or a bad bitterness exposes itself. Okay? What is the flip side of that? The flip side of that is David praying, Lord, search my heart. See if there be any wicked way in me. You see what David is doing? He's going beyond just confessing whenever he finds that he's been sinning. How did he come to this kind of incredible deep depth spiritually? He went through a time that he fudged with Bathsheba. He fudged, played with an idea, and didn't put the line in the sand for himself. So later in his life, we see him learning the hard lesson of repentance, what happened to him when he didn't repent, how it affected his bones, how Nathan had to talk to him, the effects that would come into his own family and his own kingdom. And then he comes to maturity and spiritual maturity and says, I'm not going to just confess, listen carefully, I'm not just going to confess my sin when I do it. I'm going to ask God to keep me from it. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, that I may not sin against thee. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try my reins, like you get on a new horse that you've never ridden before, and you just want to know how well trained this horse is and how you can control it. So you try the reins to see if there's a response. Lord, you try my reins. Try my reins. As being an analogy of a horse. You try my reins. See if there be any wicked way in me. God, I'm not just confessing my sin. I'm inviting you to go deep into my soul and expose that to me. See if there be any sin in me. Any propensity to sin. Do you realize how big of an extra step that is? That's a huge extra step. Of a Christian just, well, I'll admit it when I do wrong. And then going blind in the dark. And then God having to remind us when we're doing something wrong. It's an extra step to say, God, remind me. What is this really? It's saying, God, you place those boundaries. I'm looking for your boundaries. I want to know what your boundaries are for me. Then sometimes this gets very simple. As I go through Amazon Prime, and I have all these videos to watch that are free, and I found 3 or 4 the other night on ancient and 2 staff guys come up and we went through one from, I told you about Ireland, and it blew our minds because we're finding the same artwork in Ireland in the southwest that we find in Ireland, and whoa, this is Babylon all over the world. So we're watching it, and then we found a few more. When I go through those, there's a boundary I can set for and I have set that boundary. I say, okay, this secular world says that's R. That's restricted. Okay, that's my boundary. So don't even bother clicking on the trailer to watch it. You set your boundaries. You go on a date, you set your boundaries. You set your boundaries. You make a commitment to those boundaries. You set your boundaries economically. You say, I'm not going to go into debt. I'm not going to take on a debt for a car or something that I cannot believe that I can pay. Okay? I'm going to set my boundaries when I go into a store. I'm going to pay the price that's asked, and I might barter. I might say, can you give me a discount on this? But I'm not going to steal it. I'm not going to fudge on that. You set your boundaries. and you ask God to help you set those boundaries. It's a very important concept he's giving here. Very short video, but very, very profound. Gentlemen, you'll find incredible respect from a woman. They might fight you at first. What do I mean by fight you? Well, they may not have the same standard, so you might look silly to your family for your boundaries. Or they might want something desperately that your boundaries are inhibiting. Okay? But it's fascinating to watch God bless you as a husband in your family with all the mistakes I've made. And my wife and my children could list them for you, no doubt. But how often I hear my wife say, which is a very, very complimentary, comforting thing for me, to show me at least sometimes I'm illustrating a holy walk to my family. When my wife will say to my children, my daughters, as they were growing up, girls, you know we've learned a lesson, that when Daddy says something, it works out. We can trust that. Why? Because my wife is believing that if I'm trusting God, God will bless the whole family. That's an incredible thing. And you women want the same things to say about you. And how I say it a different way about my wife. God gives her wisdom many more times faster than he gives it to me. I fight her on that. I don't want to be told what to do. I'm a human being. I have that will. And then God comes to her and gives her wisdom, and she says, maybe you ought to think about this. Maybe you ought to think about that. And I'd have to think hard and long for where she was wrong. Okay. I still fight it. Okay. Maybe you ought to call someone. I got a busy schedule. But she sees things that I don't see. And so that's her playing her role as a submissive wife, and yet encouraging me and counseling me, and my role as the spiritual leader of the family to make decisions that we're going to hold to. We're not going to watch that movie. We're not going to go there. And to set those parameters. Setting boundaries in your life. Gentlemen, if you don't set boundaries before you date, there are no boundaries. If you're going to wait for the moment, you'll be then under the passions of the moment. I'm not just talking sexually, I'm talking about the passions of, you know, I went to the sale of the village, and I don't know if any of you are going to be here this summer, but there's a huge auction at the Teton Village of old cars. They'll have 150 old cars. And people have spent money on these cars. They're hobbies for some of these people. Listen, thousands of dollars. One guy took an old Land Cruiser and spent $23,000 or $4,000 fixing it up. Everything was new. It was spectacular. And it sold at the auction for $12,000. The guy lost $12,000, but it was his hobby. Like playing golf. You don't get your money back when you play golf. Well, he didn't get his money back either. And I went up to there and I saw this. I always sort of dreamed about a Mercedes-Benz. And there was a 250 sale. I guess it was a 250, and it was for sale, and the price was pretty good. And they rolled it out, and leather seats, you know, and the top was down. And I bid and bought it. And then later I sold it traded it for the boat. If you're going to be here this summer with us, we take the staff up to the lake on the boat. It's really a fun time. And then I went again, and then I really fell in love with the car. I mean, before I saw this car, I'd fallen in love with this, you know, sitting in the garage. It needs work right now. It'll probably be out before you graduate. And polish it up a little bit. And there's a little BMW Z3. And was that fun to drive? I mean, you're just right on the ground, and the steering wheel, you just really feel the road. And I got it for a good price. So I joke with people that I'm a poster boy for impetuous buying. Poster boy for impetuous buying. I don't believe that's true, but as I look back at my life, there have been too many times, especially with cars. Okay. Set your boundaries, or you wind up at the moment of the passion of the moment. Okay. And you girls set your boundaries too. Okay. And when you start dating and start getting close to someone, you want to discuss those. What are your boundaries? And have integrity with each other, discuss those boundaries. Boundaries for your family, boundaries for your home, boundaries for your ministry, what you're going to be doing together. It's a very serious thing. One more final thought as we continue on here. When he goes to the next king, you're going to find something fascinating that's going to come to the surface in this presentation. How quickly a culture can change because of the leadership. How quickly a culture can change. You're going to see this from the history of God's Word. You go from Hezekiah to Manasseh to Josiah, like that. And it can change either way, both ways. How quickly a culture can change. Okay, you could lose a whole nation in one generation. One generation. So there is no comfort that comes by thinking that usually things happen slowly. Usually the next generation will have less boundaries than the previous generation. It's okay for us to do this, but then your children will take it a step further. I have counseled people in my life in the sense of, well, I backed up on that. Sometimes I have not counseled them, and that's been an unfaithful pastor. Where I see them exhibiting this habit pattern in their family. For example, in drinking, where just drinking of wine is okay, and then just drinking socially is okay, and then just drinking a little harder alcohol is okay. And then I watch, and their child becomes an alcoholic. Because the child goes a step beyond where the parents were. Step beyond in bringing down the walls. To the children, to hold a boundary here would make your father or mother look silly in a world of social drinking. See what I'm saying? So there's pressure. So this is okay. But then the next generation goes an extra step and winds up being hurt by the parents because of what they have shown. I've seen a family show movies in their home, which I heard and knew from experience with them, because I was their pastor, that I would never show in my home. And then I see what happened to their children. See, the boundaries were lowered here because the parents thought they could handle that. They're adults. But their children were not adults. And a habit pattern was set. And then I see damage taking place. They see damage taking place. It's at those moments you want to run into the room and say, I told you so, or why didn't you pay attention, or how could you possibly do this? You don't do that because the parents are distraught. They're overcome with distraught. What's happening to my child? Boundaries have come in. Any questions? Comments? You want to add something? This is being very practical, isn't it? It really is. What does it have to do with apologetics? Well, you can see how it would have something to do with apologetics in warning the nation, in warning families. Okay, what is a pastor commissioned to do by Timothy? What does Paul say? Reprove, correct. Okay, those are pretty strong language. If there's any place I think I have failed as a pastor, it's been inherently or subconsciously avoiding that part of the ministry. Of going point blank to my people and saying individually to them, I caution you about that behavior, the effect it's going to have on your children. And I admit that. All right, it's 10 o'clock. Let's take a 10-minute break and come back and we'll hear some reports, okay? And we'll get some insight into postmodernism. And then we'll come back to perhaps some teaching, and then we'll come back to another video from that. Okay? Don't.
Thank you.
She's so good. Yeah, I love that video. So bad.
This lady, I called her, it's called for a scholarship. And she keeps calling me back when I come in class. This National City, California.
I was never LDS. Bloody. Oh, that was playing in class. I took my earbuds out and left it playing. Okay. How many times I've spelled it wrong, Julie? We're gonna get up there and I'm gonna sing goodbye. 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 Not because I have coffee. It's in there. I'm an idiot.
Lunch? Oh,
12:30?
Look, my Sarah. You don't want her?
No, I'm taking a speech.
What are all these pictures for?
I'm organizing it.
Why didn't you go to
I didn't put half
kidding.
cut just because
I'm
I'm
just
holding
kidding.
a little black girl doesn't mean I
Oh
went to Africa.
What the heck? There's so many pictures of you.
Seen
How
your
come I don't get to
pictures.
see? Where are you going?
Guys, it's not in the folder that I wrote. We're getting rid of that story.
No,
That's why we're cleaning it out.
it took me forever to get rid of all these pictures on this flash drive. I think they might still be on there, but
I forget where my flash drive is. I don't know, somewhere in my room. Somewhere.
I like the way you label.
huh?
I like the way you label. It's like she was just grabbing and doing that.
Yeah. I didn't even try to spell Zacharias.
You don't need all. I just think it's
So
not.
we're gonna do the building part.
You think I'm bad at spelling?
Yeah.
That's me. Good.
Okay.
You
It
know
was
what?
really funny when he was talking about like impulsive buying, and I'm like, hey, that's exactly like me, just on a smaller scale. Like,
6 snowboards. Dude, you need
I
to
have
go.
5.
You need to
What?
go to that car actually.
Dude, I know.
They're really cool.
I can't afford one for marriage.
There you go.
But
What do you do, man?
I don't want to give a freaking speech.
I'm kind of excited about my presentation.
Just get into it. Use kind of motions. Get
You're in the
animated.
middle, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
the
Just
geography
make it
might go
good.
last.
It would be after
Make
you
good
were
goal
alive.
that.
Literally not much
No way to
postmodernism.
Fine, giving speeches. It's just I'm coming before them. There's a reason for that. I wanted to be first so no one would remember me.
I need
You need more
aid from a
options.
Band-Aid.
No. My speech would be fine, but
No, my point is
I'm not
just make it
Abby
fun.
or Alexa.
It's just to have fun.
What'd you say about me?
What'd you say about me?
I'm Abby.
That's weird.
No, you're not. That's relative.
Ah,
No, that'd be postmodernism.
why are you so?
Same thing.
Is it? Nope, not same thing.
Postmodernism encompasses relativism. Get your facts right.
No,
Mom.
there is a difference.
Do your
I found
research.
a difference.
There is a difference, but it encompasses relativism.
Yes, but it's like the epitome of relativism.
Oh,
Like
bless you.
relativism says what's right for you is right for you, but postmodernism says what's right for you is right.
And then what's right for someone else is right for them.
Really good.
No, it's just is right.
Child just likes.
That doesn't make
Just likes
sense,
to
because
argue.
if what's right for you is what's right,
Yes, Lena.
that would make that an objective truth, which means it's not relative.
What?
But that's why it's postmodern, not relative.
Postmodernism is a relativistic thought, though.
Yeah.
No, it's more like what's right for
He
you.
just wants to argue. Just don't give him any more.
Which is relative.
That's not what he's saying. He's saying what's right for you is what's right.
But that is relative.
Is that supposed to make sense?
No.
What's right for you is what's right for you. But saying what's right for you is what's right, you're saying,
You.
right, but he left off the for you, that's not.
He's implying because it can't be objective. So
No, he wasn't.
5 minutes?
That's what she said.
5
He
minutes?
said no.
5 minutes?
5 minutes of what? It's like the whole.
Just turn down.
Why is it so
I get that whole thing, I get that whole thing.
That's the
I was arguing with Austin over words. And what he was saying about Alexis.
Get out.
And my
Wow,
dad,
Liz.
he
Oh,
sometimes, well, something like that for my mom.
One.
And I've just been posting around Craigslist for a couple of days looking for, this one looks like it's a good pick. I mean, it's got 40,000 miles on it,
Does-
which is a lot.
I'm sorry, but
But it's 2005.
so.
It's okay, you don't have to do this right now.
What if I want to?
You don't have to.
I can do what I want to do.
I'm just gonna point the live stream right at your computer.
It's not even on.
Would you please, no, don't.
It's not on.
I don't think it's on.
It's not.
Exactly. I might buy it.
That means our speeches aren't live streamed.
There we go.
Win!
Winner.
I might buy this one.
What?
So.
Live stream isn't.
I'm looking for
Electorate
a bigger bike
50,
than the one I was
so-
initially talking about.
But like,
Oh, okay.
I'm looking for something bigger.
if we
That's
just
so you
do
can,
the
like, pack
speeches
things on it?
here now,
Yeah,
with everyone in
and
the
it's the
room,
bike I'm gonna
it's
try to
fine,
take up to
and
the
it
Arctic
ends there.
Circle.
But if it's
Yeah.
on live
Okay,
stream, it's publicly
and so
immortalized
the
forever.
09 800 is like
Anyone can go back and
for
watch
me.
it if they want
Yeah.
to.
Guys, no one's gonna go back and.
Don't underestimate my parents.
You know, nobody else made this big deal about their speeches.
I'm not making a big deal.
The big deal's being made.
I am the big deal. Why did God give me the ability to speak?
Okay, this is an interesting question. If you're deaf, how do you hear thoughts in your mind? Like,
I don't know.
you don't hear a voice in your head. Like,
Here, you can still.
So, okay, I read something really interesting about deaf schizophrenic people. Okay, they see disembodied hands signing at them instead of hearing voices.
okay, I was wondering that,
Yeah.
or like,
I know,
or
but
like
like,
for me, I hear a voice in my head. But when I picture words, I picture text. So I'm wondering if like deaf people just strictly picture text and don't have a voice. Or if they do have something in their head, they just...
Is he coming?
They're not!
Is he coming?
Yeah, you can think of pictures.
What? He's coming!
is who coming?
Pastor Don.
Lord!
Why are you so slow?
If you clean a vacuum, that makes you a vacuum.
Abby laughs at her own jokes more than other people.
I've heard that Jeeps are actually really difficult to keep out.
I will.
Girl, going old school.
I'm gonna wing it.
That's what I do.
Oh, you hear that? Yeah.
I ran out my thoughts, I'm like, I'll just go for it.
It's about having fun with it, honestly. I know that's not a professional attitude.
What?
But it's about knowing
I swear
the
she's
basic
possessed.
ideas you want to say, and then just kind of fleshing it out as you go.
Weird.
But I'm not professional, and I'm not very good. So who wants to test that?
Where do you get it?
Up top.
A dow or a cuck? A cow and a dow.
Oh, thank you! Thank you, Jeanette, for laughing at those. I thought they were funny, and Julie hated them.
I was
In a group text message.
I was ready to go to bed, man. That's what happened, okay?
I was past the point of feeling ready for bed. That's why you were getting those.
It's the 658. They were very good this bike. I wouldn't go that far, but it is more expensive. And
I don't understand.
yeah, but it says 800 cc, but it's F650 liter. F800, F650, F1200. Okay, that shows,
280.
like, that shows how many cc's it has.
About a half of one.
It's a sweet bike. But I'm not entirely sure.
This one's okay. This one's two-wheel drive and so it's useless.
Useless. My dad has
I'm
okay, but something I can yeah, that's my dad. Basically, my dad's on the car right there. Yeah. There's actually this picture of it.
and it's on my.
What's my needed
I can
answer, but here's the thing, it's smog check. It's
Pretty likely that car would work. Like,
actually,
it's very likely actually. When you look at it, where is it? Tijuana, heck yeah. Let's see what kind of cars we can find in Tijuana.
All right, students, thank you for waiting. I got caught up again, some really neat news happening today. So, the Congress is voting on the new health bill, and President Trump this morning held a meeting, I guess, in the Rose Garden, and with spiritual leaders, religious leaders from around the country, and made some incredible statements. Ooh, at least a breath of fresh air for some time. And is telling churches something about, I gotta get this, we've gotta watch it together maybe, but that the country started in the pulpit, something like that, the freedom started there, something of that nature. And I don't think I have the whole quote, I didn't hear it. And that's where we're gonna go back to. And that the churches and the pulpit churches have the right, and people have the right to believe whatever they want, Muslim, Christian, whatever, and that the persecution of Christians in the United States is over. Something like that. It's an interesting statement.
Who said?
President Trump. And that churches have a right in the churches to preach and say politically whatever they want. Now that's interesting because there's been all this pressure on pastors that we weren't allowed to teach, we weren't allowed to say anything political because you could lose your tax status. And he says the IRS will not go after churches. That's over. So, I mean, this is amazing. This is really amazing because some of us have been watching this go downhill for. Okay, we got some reports. And I did talk to your dad. He's going to be here Tuesday or Wednesday. Okay, and then your brother and his wife come in Friday. So, boy, I can't believe it. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. I just can't believe it.
I'm ready.
All right.
You may as well cry, Pastor Don.
Hey, life goes on. Right?
Yeah.
I joke about it. That brings a little levity to the situation. Okay. All right, who's first in our reports? Yes, you're first. Either that or rapture practice.
Okay, so my speech is on postmodernism, and what we're going to do is we divided the speech up into 3 parts. I'm going to cover a definition and a brief background overview of history, and then Lex and Abs will take other aspects of it. So, the definition that Merriam-Webster gives for postmodernism is of, relating to, or being a theory that involves a radical reappraisal of modern assumptions about culture, identity, history, or language. And what this basically means is that modernism or postmodernism wants to break away from the traditional, from the foundational that our culture has established in our culture, in our identity, in our history, and in our language. And I have like 5 basic points of what postmodernism is. There are lots more, but I just kind of chose these 5. There is no absolute truth. Truth and error are synonymous. Traditional authority is false and corrupt. Morality is personal, and all religions are valid. And I'm just going to kind of go through all of these. There is no absolute truth. Postmodernists believe that you can't find truth. There is no truth to be found. And later I'll show how like all of this is really self-contradictory and everything. And truth and error are synonymous. Along with the not being able to find absolute truth, truth and error are the same thing. Truth is error, error is truth. You can't find truth. So, and then traditional authority is false and corrupt. Again, with the idea of postmodernism being a breaking away from the traditional, from the foundational, authority is seen as false and corrupt. And then morality is personal. We kind of saw this yesterday in the video by Ravi Zacharias, in that you have your own religion, I have my religion, but we keep it separate. We keep it at home, like he said. Just like you do you, I do me, we don't do whatever together, we keep it separate. And then along with that is all religions are valid. It kind of follows the same idea of your religion is fine and my religion is fine, but kind of like the coexist thing, like don't impose your beliefs on me. And I don't know who found this lecture, but Lex showed it to me and everything. And so it's by John Stone Street, and he did a lecture on postmodernism, and it was really helpful. I didn't have time to watch all of it, but it was really good. And kind of the part of his lecture that pertained to my speech was he said that modernism sets our cultural mood. And like we can see, like Lex will touch on this later, but we can see like how much modernism and postmodernism is in our culture today. And one of the big things that he said is that we give our impression of reality. Like you get to decide what's reality for you, I get to decide what's reality for me, and like we get to decide what reality is, what a religion is, what a belief is, what a worldview is. Like we get to decide. And some of the basic points that he brought up about postmodernism was progress cannot be made, reality is never understood, life is not whole, and nothing can be supported. And like the conclusion that he came to is that postmodernism is so self-contradictory, and like I can show you that in those points that he brought about. Progress cannot be made. Yet you are claiming progress by saying you have come to this worldview, to this theory, and you believe this idea, so you have progress, but you're saying progress can't be made. Reality is never understood. Yet you're claiming to understand reality by having this worldview. Life is not whole, yet you're saying life can be whole if you hold to this worldview. And nothing can be supported. Yet you are supporting what you're saying can't be supported. And so you can see, it's just like John Stone Street was very good at just explaining postmodernism and the effect it has on our culture. Okay, I'm going to go to a brief history of postmodernism. The idea of postmodernism came about with the book The Postmodern Condition by Jean-Francois Lyotard in 1979. And pretty much everyone knows the 60s and 70s was the hippie era and the sexual revolution, and so, but that era was prepped by several different things in our history. One of those things was the Industrial Revolution. People were moving from the country to the city to a more urban society, and along with that came a greater interest in literacy and education. And a few men that really had an impact on postmodernism was Karl Marx with his Communist Manifesto, which brought about the idea of socialism and communism, and Darwin with evolution, Freud with his philosophies. And another big thing that influenced postmodernism is both world wars. All of these things together set the stage for postmodernism. And it came about in the late 70s, like officially, and then from that time on to present day, it has grown and grown and grown, and it has permeated our society today.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you guys have all talked about who's going next, huh?
Yes. Okay, so my job was to tell you guys how what modernism is and how that's translated into postmodernism, because I haven't really studied isms much. So when it came to postmodernism, my first thought was, what's modernism? Because you can't have postmodernism without having modernism. So I looked it up, and on Google, modernism is a style or movement in the arts that aims to break with classical and traditional forms, a movement toward modifying traditional beliefs in accordance with modern ideas. So we kind of had modernism take over. The dates were kind of fuzzy because dates are like that. So we had kind of the 1600s all the way up to around 1970s when the postmodernism started coming about. And when we had this modernism, we almost had two strains of it coming through America. We had the American modernism with like our culture and our country, and then we had the church modernism coming alongside it. So I'm going to talk about American, and then I'm going to talk about the church one second. So with the American modernization, we had the industrialization coming along, we had progress, we had urbanization. Henry Ford's assembly line kind of kick-started everything off with just progress, and the scientific method was a huge thing that came about, and just men learning to reason and realizing what they can come up with, what we can invent, just this explosion of knowledge. And the world was rapidly changing, and so were its people. The Industrial Revolution what set the stage for the modernization of America. I found this quote, and you may not agree with it, but I thought it kind of brought up some interesting points. And it said, the first characteristic associated with modernism is nihilism, the rejection of all religious and moral principles as the only means of obtaining social progress. In other words, the modernists repudiated the moral codes of the society in which they were living in. The reason that they did so was not necessarily because they did not believe in God, although there was a great majority of them who were atheists, or that they experienced great doubt about the meaninglessness of life. Rather, their rejection of conventional morality was based on its arbitrariness, its conformity, and its exertion of control over human feelings. In other words, the rules of conduct were a restrictive and limiting force over the human spirit. The modernists believed that for an individual to feel whole and a contributor to the revitalization of the social process, he or she needed to be free of all the encumbering baggage of hundreds of years of hypocrisy. So you can kind of just see the mental mindset of everybody with kind of breaking away from church and God, as that's repressive and that's old, and now we're moving on to a greater thing, and that's man and reason and uplifting that. And so I found it interesting that the church kind of seemed to open its doors, its front doors, to this idea of kicking God out the door and uplifting man and reason. So I'm going to kind of translate into that church modernism. And church modernism seemed to be a good thing, and it wasn't new. You can kind of see it come about at different times, and the concept seems to be a good idea of just kind of bringing the church up to date with the times and not keeping with these old traditions, and kind of making it more relative and relatable to society and people around you. And that sounds like a great idea, but it wasn't. This quote is, one of the recurring cycles of church history is that of theological modernism. Modernism is a determined effort on the part of those who have lost their personal faith in the divine origin of the Holy Scriptures to convince others of their impoverished views. So with this modernism came, like I said, the uplifting of man's reason and man, and the kicking out of God as our basis and our entire foundation for reasoning. The greatest disappointment in this entire cultural shift of modernism was that it was allowed and promoted by the church. The pastors and preachers of our churches were oftentimes the ones that were promoting it first, and that was interesting for me to find that a lot of the things that came about with this modernism are the ideas of God as love. We've covered that one before, where the justness and and hell is just completely disregarded, and just God is love. Everything can be covered by love. The Mosaic record is myth, evolution is fact. A Lutheran theologian, Helmut Thiekley, I have no idea how to say his last name, declared that he was not embarrassed to confess that his grandfather was a monkey and his great-grandfather a tadpole. And that's the preacher of a church. Like, this is what our church is accepting and teaching and embracing. Higher criticism came about. We've talked about that as well. And just kind of a refreshment on that. A critic is a judge. So you're judging the scriptures. And you're not just judging anymore what it says, but why it was said. Ideas and concepts are viewed as suspect and insubstantial. As Ravi Zacharias said in a couple videos ago, there was a sovereignty of academia over the text. Implicit in the higher criticism of the text was the denial of the authorship of God. Bible became ancient legend, not historical accuracy. The Bible became mythological, as in the miracles were myth. They weren't actually history, those didn't happen. And Bible was no longer the moral standard. Man became the moral standard. So you can just see this kicking out of God, and yet I found it interesting that without God, why would you have a church? What's the point of continuing to preach? And so you can kind of see the God is dead movement slowly creeping in. And without us even realizing it, we were kicking out God and uplifting reason. And I find that so contradictory because God is reason. The only reason we can reason is because of God. And yet when we uplift man's reason and we kick out God, we're going to end up with foolishness. So postmodernism sort of started to come about because man realized that their reasoning couldn't bring them to the point that they were wanting it to. Their reasoning couldn't bring ultimate fulfillment. So postmodernism, a definition of that I found was postmodernism is difficult to define because to define it would violate the postmodernist premise of no definite terms, boundaries, or absolute truths exist. So defining postmodernism is really hard because they're against definitions. Modernism and reliance on man had failed within our culture, so we started shifting to having no hope, not even in ourselves. Nothing was the answer because there was no answer to be found. Modernism, this is kind of the mindset of postmodernists. Modernism had failed at upgrading our society. Religion had only caused destruction. Nationalism and capitalism both did their damage. So what's left? Lost and hopelessness, really. And then you become your own standard because there's nothing else to live for except for yourself. I found it interesting in that same lecture that Lex brought up. He said that postmodernism was not a direct frontal attack to the church, but rather it creeped in. And so for me, it's kind of a mental image of we have a church opening its front doors to modernism, and while it's doing that, it let the parasite of postmodernism in the back door. And it's eaten away at our church. And now we might have been able to fight some of the modernism, the more blatant attacks at our church, but postmodernism has seeped in and we're still fighting it. And I found some of this in my own thought processes. It just creeps in. And so as a closing, I just wanted to read some verses from Ecclesiastes because I hadn't studied postmodernism much, but as I read people's articles and blogs, I was overwhelmed by the lostness of people and their mindsets. So, what advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. All things are wearisome, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realize that this also is striving after wind, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his futile life? He will spend them like a shadow. For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. And as I look at the history of our world, apart from God, you just see man trying to find fulfillment in all of these things. And postmodernism, I feel like man has finally come to the point where they understand that it's all vanity. But instead of coming to the point where they realize that God is the fulfillment of man, they have kicked God out and now they're left with nothing. They have no reason to exist. They have no hope for their life. So they're just eternally lost. Postmodernism cannot fulfill man. It can only summarize how lost our society is apart from God. And I found it interesting that postmodernism, as contradictory as it is, they're just trying to find a little bit of something to fulfill themselves, even though that's contradictory in and of itself. But you cannot fulfill yourself apart from God. He has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. Postmodernism cannot fulfill man. And for the church, I feel like we need to combat it within our church, but we also need to have pity on these people that believe such an illogical thing that we can laugh at, but that's what they're left with. When you kick God out the door, you are left with an illogical worldview, and you're lost. Thank you. Okay.
I'm just going to start with a verse or a couple of verses from First Chronicles, and the importance of understanding the times and the culture and the Bible. So in First Chronicles 12, it talks about how when David is going to kind of overtake Saul's kingdom and like become king, but there was conflict there because like David wasn't part of his family, and so all of the other tribes of Israel are like contributing warriors to this, I guess, army to protect David and to be on his side. And in verse 32, it says, "And the sons of Issachar, whose men understood the times with knowledge of what Israel should do, their chiefs were 200, where all the other ones were like 400,000 in number. And all of their kinsmen of the tribes of Issachar were the ones of their command, of like all of the other 400,000. So because they understood the times, they were the chiefs. And so they knew what to do. So kind of summarizing a little bit of what they talked about, how did we get here to the postmodernism? John Stonestreet recognized this progression from pre-modernism through to postmodernism. So in pre-modernism, there is a strong belief in the supernatural, and truth is objective, and truth corresponds to reality, and truth is known by revelation and reason and experience. And then in the birth of science, we come up with the modern period, and kind of like the throwing revelation out the back door, because now we have science to explain everything. So now there's the skepticism of the supernatural, and then truth now becomes, truth is still objective, and it corresponds to reality, but now it's not known by revelation, it's just known by reason and experience. And then with this, I guess, birth of science, there's now this great belief in progression that Abby talked about. And now this progression is bringing so many great things like medical advancements and technology and stuff like that, but it's also bringing a bunch of horrible things like Julie talked about with war and nuclear power that could wipe out the planet. And so people are like, no more progress. And so now we get to this postmodernism mindset where there's a disbelief in progress, there's a skepticism of all claims of knowledge, and rejecting all authority, and that gives any sort of real meta-narrative for everything that's going on. Meta-narrative, big story, overarching principle of, the Bible. But, so now truth in postmodernism is subjective and is obtained only by experience. So only by the person themselves. No revelation, no reason, no nothing. So in the philosophy of postmodernism, there's a rejection of essentialism, which means that things can be whatever you want them to be. There's no absolute essence to anything. There's only different people's interpretations of things. So I can call this desk a cup, and it'll be a cup to me. And that's fine. And you can't tell me that it's not a cup. And so, like, normal, I guess, in this sense, is, like, determined by whoever's in power or whoever the majority is. And so, like, this is where legislation can come in and redefine marriage for all of us. And everyone's like, okay, that's all right. That's what it's going to be. So there's nothing more than interpretation. And then there's also a rejection of universal explanations or universal meta-narratives, or there's no legitimate thing that, I guess, ties all of history together, and anything that claims to do that is rejecting and suppressing people in, or somewhere, someone, something. And so, like, meta-narratives are just tools for oppression. And like Ravi Zacharias talked about, like, history is so important, and like all over the Bible, God is always telling people, like, tell this to your children, like, make these monuments, or like do these certain things so that when children ask, you can tell them, like, this is why we do the things that we do, because God brought us this far. And then postmodernism also elevates the role of the interpretive community, which means that meaning can only be derived by one's cultural context, by, words create reality, they don't reflect reality. So I can call this table a cup, and then it's a cup. There's no normative meaning to anything, and history is just unimportant. And then there's also the rejection of traditional logic. We've already talked about this a little bit, how it contradicts itself, but everything is interpretation, and all interpretations are valid for you. And coherence and consistency are illusions, and they're not there. So how do we see this in culture? Truth is, I guess how it plays out in culture, is truth is not objective, but based on feelings. Does anybody smell hedonism? There are no universal values that apply everywhere to everyone. It is wrong to say that Jesus is the only way that works, and it may work for you, but it may not work for other people. And can anybody smell pragmatism? There's a basis for moral action, and it's not universal rights, but it's the relationship with the other person. So there's no universal right and wrong. It's just how I am with other people, and that's okay. And then we are the product of our culture. There's nothing more, and there's nothing less. And no one has the right to tell another person that they're wrong in their interpretation of what they see. And if they do, they're intolerant. And it's kind of funny, like when worldviews change, we get like a redefinition of terms here as well. So I found that intolerant used to be when you disagree and you take action against it. But now it means when you disagree. Tolerant was when you disagree and put up with it, but now it means when you're in agreement. So now intolerant is tolerant, and tolerant is intolerant. So it doesn't make sense. And so like, kind of where we find it in culture, in literature, it's all over the place, deconstructionism and what people write all the time. In philosophy, we see it in relativistic kind of terms. We see it in pragmatism, hedonism, like almost any other ism that you can find. Art, you see it in surrealism, which doesn't really reflect reality. It like creates a reality for you, like whatever, that person sees, that's reality for them. We see it in history, in the anti-meta-narrative kind of mindset, and it's a very revisionist kind of history because we see what we want to see. And then we can also see it in TV shows. So like I'm just going to put the example out there of sitcoms where, one person can do one thing in one episode and it has no bearing on any other episodes. So, so it doesn't affect their life in any way in any other episode except for that one. So like it kind of, breaks up life and kind of sees there's no consequences to anything. And then you can also see it in music and what people are putting out there. One huge example that I saw it in was Eminem, and like if you're not me, you don't have the right to judge me kind of thing. And I don't know, I feel like that's a really pervasive kind of concept in today's culture. And then you also see it in sociology, in multiculturalism. So like no culture is better than another. You don't have any right to tell any other culture that they're wrong in anything. And there's like only diversity. You can't have any unity in anything. So I saw a lot of Babel and like the Tower of Babel in this, because like when we were unified, there was like so much wickedness and so much evil, and then God was like, okay, let's separate them and separate the cultures and languages and the nations. And in the end, when we're all in heaven, in like the new earth and the new heaven, we'll all be one again in culture and language of people. But that's a unity in diversity, because he mentions like all the tribes, all the nations, all the peoples, all the languages. And they're all wearing white, and they've all been washed in the blood of the Lamb, and they're all, together in Christ. And then I thought it was kind of cool how John Stonestreet like pointed out that all of the other isms offer an alternative salvation. And there's lots of postmodernism Christians, I guess, who are walking away from God because they don't feel him, and they have this necessity to feel him. And if they don't feel him, then he's not real. But that's not true. And that kind of made me a little bit like, because it's not whether if you feel God or not. God is real, and it doesn't matter what you feel about him. It's whether he exists, and he does. So you either judge truth by your feelings or your feelings by truth. And you either determine truth by your experience or you determine experience by truth. And so, God is the way, the truth, and the life, and he's the only way to the Father, and no one can come to him except through him. Yeah. And so, Julie already pointed out some contradictions, but I just think they're funny, so I'm going to read them. So, proposing that there is no truth is a truth statement. Asking that we agree with postmodernism interpretation, that there is nothing but interpretation. Announcing authoritatively that authoritative announcements are invalid. Offering the meta-narrative that there are no meta-narratives. Claiming it is immoral to oppress people with morality. It is intolerant to be intolerant. And I just thought that was funny. And they present an argument which proves no arguments are sound. A proof that there's no such thing as proofs, which is nonsense. That's from C.S. Lewis. So yeah, how does this affect us, or like, how do we see it kind of like contrasting and clashing with Christianity? Is that Christianity shows a meta-narrative. You know, the Bible kind of explains how everything happened in the beginning, and it goes through, and then it shows how it is going to happen in the end. Christianity is historical. Like Ravi was saying, it's important to know so that we don't repeat the past sins of, you know, our forefathers. And it's important, like I mentioned earlier, like with kind of relating how God has worked in our life and the lives of everyone that came before us, and how far He's brought us and where He's going to bring us. Christianity does propose moral norms, authority, and objective truth, which, you know, postmodernism just completely throws out the window. So if we let this into Christianity, it brings open, or like reopens the Bible to new interpretation, and the Bible then becomes relative, and it becomes unauthoritative, and there's nothing I guess it can stand on. Yeah. And there's this quote by a guy, Richard Rorty, who was one of the influencers in postmodernism, and I thought it was very interesting because he kind of brought up the idea that like you need God, but He doesn't want God. So it's like he realizes what's going on, but he just can't do it. So I'll read this to close. I came to realize that a search for the philosophers for a grand scheme that would encompass everything was illusory. Only a theism that combined a God with equal measure of truth, love, and justice could do the trick. But since I could not imagine myself being religious, I had indeed become more raucously secular. I did not consider that an option for me.
Wow, you girls did a great job. Don't you think so?
Yeah.
Really helping us understand something that's really hard to understand. And something hard, it's hard to catch a greased pig, okay? It's hard to catch an eel with slippery eel. Take these philosophical thoughts and trying to make them make sense to us, okay? There is no question that this has really affected, we're going to look at that next, that affected our lives in the church as well. A couple add-on comments here. By the way, I really do mean that. You girls did a great job on that. If you see the flow of history now, as we've done, through the church age, and then more recently with the videos we're watching with Ravi and Schaefer, you begin to see how this thing starts to develop and how it comes about. How it sets us, I think, up for the future as well. Most of you are probably aware of some of this. Let me throw some things in to add just to fill in some gaps here perhaps. Hegel, dialecticism or dialectic thought, Hegel was saying that, or taught, and this is perhaps a precursor to postmodernism, and it's parallel with postmodernism. So Hegel thought, okay, you're going to have a thesis, an idea, a concept, postulate, a proposition. And what you do is this thesis is going to by itself cause an anti-thesis. Okay, something in opposition to this. Now you have the two opposing views. And that this is going to, when these two are worked out, then you're going to come to the middle and you're going to come to a compromise or a balance in a bad way, of a synthesis. Okay? And then this synthesis will start the process all over again and will cause an anti-synthesis and bring a new synthesis. So that what he's really getting at here is this is a process that he believes in, and this is what leads us to ultimate truth, or to truth. So the truth here is a combination of these two, or a compromise between the two. We can see how that parallels some thinking in postmodernism. This is a precursor to a new definition on tolerance. Tolerance is now trying to find the truth by taking the opposition and merging it together and coming up with a synthesis. Okay? There is some element of truth experientially in this, because we find in psychology that a person who really fights something can tend to become more like it over a period of time. And let me subset this, and this is going to be a little hard for me to describe and even harder for me to prove. But for example, because of the nature of mankind, the truth of the fall of human beings, the truth of the power of the old nature for an unsaved person, for a Christian he has power to get away from that old nature. So what we have is, okay, supposing we have father and son, and in this relationship, the father is an alcoholic, and the son is either a Christian or non-Christian, and I'm just talking on a level here of human to human. And so you're an alcoholic, and you mistreat your family, mistreat your wife, mistreat your son, and the son looks at that alcoholism, and he winds up hating his father and hating what his father has done to him. But hate, undealt with, unforgiven, is a characteristic of the old nature. So what does the old nature promise and can only bring about? What got his father into trouble? Living according to the flesh. Now in hating his father, where's he? In the flesh. Are you with me? So, don't be surprised that the statistics show that more children of alcoholics become alcoholics. What would you think would be the normal thing, Alina? What would be the normal thing to assume? That less children of alcoholics become alcoholics because they see the results firsthand and they deplore it, and so they push it away and don't become alcoholics. But when he deals with his hate and lives in that hate, and in a world that has fragmentation and dissolution and pain, he's going to try and find an answer for that. Ta-da! So he is more susceptible in the flesh to trying to find his own answers. And he's already been illustrated how somebody else did it. Do you understand? A person who has been abused will tend to be an abuser. Why? Because of the truth and the reality of the creation and the truth and the reality of the fall of man and the psychology of the fallenness of man. All right? So that's another way of saying beware of dialectic thinking, because he's presuming he can find truth by one side and the opposite coming together to have a synthesis in the middle. Now what else do you see here? If I was to chart geographical percentages of land surface, you say, where are you going with this? Okay, if I was going to chart land surface, the United States would be a lower percent of the land surface of the globe compared to the Far East, where you have a larger percentage of, right? If I were to look at population, I would see the United States has a smaller population worldwide percentage than the Far East has a population. Look at China and Asia, Malaysia, etc. India. It's fascinating that when we see postmodernism take over this geographical populated area, as it has done, you and I tend, since we're living in this fishbowl, tend to think it's something new. Come on, somebody finish a statement. But it's not. It has already been in place over here in a larger geographical area with a larger population for a long time. Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism, Taoism. Okay? These isms were all predicated on, and go back a long way in history, don't they? To a time and a foundation that there isn't any real truth. Postmodernism, when you boil it down, is a direct attack on God. God being unalterable, immutable truth. Thus, it's an attack on His Word. It's an attack on God philosophically, literally. If I was to bring postmodernism into the church, I'm bringing in relativistic, evolutionary humanism in spiritual robes. Okay? You say, well, how could this come in through the pulpit and into the church? As you mentioned, girls, that it just really came into the church. It did come into the church. Snuck in, I think one of you said. Sort of creeped in. Not a frontal attack. How? Because the people in the church were already infected with relativistic evolutionary humanism. All the players were in line on the team. So to apply it to the spiritual, literally, the spiritual world, was just the next step. Okay? And we see it. And you're going to run into this in your own life, in your children's lives, and in the lives of the people you're going to work with. Okay? The struggle with this, or the answer to this, is not just to go after the ism. It's to go after the core of what's driving these things. And the only way to do that is to hone our tools and our apologetics suitcase, our tool case, to go back to presentation of the truth, etc. And what we're dealing with truth then is truth/reality. What is really true? What is really reality? You can see it in the movies. The whole culture has been postmodernized. I'm not saying that a movie with special effects is of itself sinful, but you can see it as a tremendous tool. So where you take a child growing up, and he really never is able to discern. Now, this is fascinating to me. He never is able to truly discern what is real and is not real. Is that not what captivates you with movies? Is that movies on a flat screen can take you into a whole world that exists? And what's fascinating about it is the special effects, the special sounds, the artist's work is so well done that the reality and the non-reality are equal. Therefore, the whole thing becomes reality. The girls gave you some really neat things to think about, didn't you? You sort of laughing. I heard you giggling and talking because you saw what they were saying. Then in the new movies, since reality and non-reality are equal, reality is lost. Reality is what we ever choose it to be. Think it through. So here's this Jeep commercial, and the Jeep is being chased. Well, you're not sure if the Jeep is being chased by the rabbit or the rabbit is chasing the Jeep, or vice versa. But there's a rabbit, and you're really not sure. You know that rabbits don't chase Jeeps. But that's the rational, real world. But in the advertisement, something totally different is happening. You're taken into a world where now truth is what is being presented to you in such a well-done way that you're never really sure whether this is true or that's true. And it doesn't bother you or matter because that's not the purpose of trying to find out what's true. You're presented what you think is true, and then using it, for example, to sell cars. When you really start thinking about this, you're going to see it. You're going to see it all around you. And I've had it presented to me in statements. I've had it presented to me in videos that I see or commercials that I watch. Okay. Years ago, we were discussing something. Went through a hard time in our church, as you know, and the wife of an elder came up to me and said this. Dear woman, loves Jesus. And she said, relationships are more important than truth. One of you girls hinted at that. I wrote it down when you said it. Relationships are more important than truth. You know one of you said that it made me go back to that experience? The idea of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Do I determine what good experience is from the Word of God, or do I determine the Word of God from my experiences? Who said that? Did you say that, Alexa? That's just another way of saying this issue of the chicken and the egg. Which comes first, truth or experience, or relationship? Oh my goodness, certainly relationship's more important than truth because it is a relationship with Jesus, more important than dogma and doctrine. See how easy it is to make that argument, or sounds good to make that argument? The problem is, if I don't know the truth, how do I know which Jesus I'm talking about? The truth will determine by definition who it is. So I can say all day long I have a relationship with Jesus. I can say that all day long. From my experience, I go all day long and have a high for Jesus. The question is it the right Jesus? So truth must precede experience. Experience must be based on the truth. God doesn't say throw experience away. He doesn't. And God couches it in another argument. Truth and love. They seem at times to be contradictory. You see the argument of do everything through love or truth. And so you have denominations and people that swing to the scholastic side or swing to the pietist side. We discussed that earlier, didn't we, in church history? Okay. And you have to determine what is your sequence of thought that you're going to use to determine and to come to truth. Okay? All right, thank you. That really good thoughts, and we're going to spend some more time on this as we get into it here. Let me see, there's two more things I want to hit here. We say this over and over, and I said we do this on purpose so you can grasp it yourself and really hone in on it. You have this idea of relativism. You have the idea that it's an attack on absolute. As soon as you attack the absolute, you're really attacking God because He is the only absolute. So another thought I bring into you quickly here is that what you wind up with is with fragmentation. Someone said you can do this, and there's never any unity. They're searching for a unity, but they wind up with disunity, disillusion. All right? It's just the opposite. Well, that's logical. If God is a unity, and you divorce the unity, reject the unity, what's the opposite of unity? Disunity. And that's what the result is. Again, such a simple statement in good tree and bad tree. Okay? I'm going to look into the Issachar thing because I never picked up on this idea that they therefore were the leaders. That's an interesting thought. That's a neat application. Because what we need today is people who can think. Now, one more thought I want to throw at you here quickly, take a quick break again. I think that it's very difficult for adults. Now, I'm not saying you're not adults. When I use the word adult now, I'm talking about old people. Okay? It's very hard for my generation, on one side of the coin, it's very hard for my generation to grasp postmodernism. Because everything that is presented, and it's hard for you in some sense because you're a Christian. So you're influenced by absolute. So you're trying to grasp, what does this really mean to have an honest view, your honest view, meaning you have integrity in you actually believe this, that there is no reality from truth. And it's very hard for old people to grasp this. Because much of our life, percentage-wise, is in the arena of right and wrong, the Christian consensus. On the other side of the coin, you think I'm going to say it's very easy for the youth generation to understand it. I'm not sure. Then you're talking to the fish in the water. Because their entire world. Now, just look up here and I want you to try and do something. Not so much for you because you have Christian influence in your life now. Try and imagine, just briefly, what it would be like to be Clay's age and growing up immersed in a totally postmodern mindset with application. Imagine what it would be like. No longer able to discern that there even is any alternative to this way of thinking about truth. That's what we're facing in the future. That's this alien mindset that we're facing in the future, and it isn't very far away, where a whole generation has been raised with the absence of anything to contrast it to. My generation, we can contrast it. I can watch these movies and enjoy them, but my mind is always playing in the background. I wonder how they did that, which is a way of saying what? I know that that's not reality. But the young people aren't there. Did I tell you the story about Annie in the fall? and we were watching, as a family, every Monday night, Bev would make stir fry and we would watch Alf. Remember me telling you about that? How many remember that? How many don't? Let me remind you. And every Monday night we're sitting there watching Alf. And I'm sitting there one night, just amazed, because my mind is contrasting it to reality. I know Alf didn't arrive here in a spaceship. I know Alf is a puppet. Actually, two things. He's a midget in a puppet outfit on some of the scenes, and the other time he's just somebody's hand in a puppet. And I'm sitting there in front of my family, and I make a statement of contrast between postmodernism, presentation of some reality that's not real, and for the purpose of getting everybody watching it to believe that he is what? Ta-da! And I'm sitting there saying, I said to my family, I said, that's incredible. How can one guy's hand do all that? His nose is shriveling up, his eyes are blinking, and they're going back and forth, his mouth is going, and my daughter, Annie, is little. She's about perhaps 8 or 9. And she says, what do you mean, Dad? I said, well, that's a puppet. There's a guy's hand in there. And Annie, a Christian, okay, in a Christian home. You would think she's immune to this. No. She said, what do you mean, Dad? Isn't he real? I said, no, he's not real. I was taking enjoyment by the fact that I know he's not real. She was taking enjoyment from these sessions, thinking he was real. Two different conclusions. Takes me back to Jonah, where there were so many children, 120,000 children in the city of Nineveh, who couldn't tell between the right hand and the left. And James Dobson made this statement one time. He said, here's the difficulty, here's the challenge with children. They cannot discern reality from fantasy. So if you were Satan, if you were trying to develop a mental way of thinking for the whole human race, to foster the ground, to lay the framework for someone to come along and listen carefully, say it slow. If you were Satan, what scheme would you pull off to try and prepare human beings for being ready to accept something so absurd and yet accepted as truth that a human being has finally attained godness? You would first redefine truth and then train them to live in that non-truth. So when he comes and presents himself, it's just as normal as being to believe it. Are you with me? I'm not saying it was wrong to watch Alf. But my daughter, in a Christian home with a pastor father, and a Christian mother, a godly woman, Christian herself, could not discern between reality and fantasy. And as soon as that happens, listen, as soon as that happens, fantasy becomes reality. As soon as fantasy becomes reality, that's going to take us, after break, to the next step, where now we move from postmodernism to a brand new post-postmodernism, where now I can project whatever I want to be truth and expect it to be true. You say, well, Pastor Don, give me a question that's floating around in my head. Get ready? Get deep seat and settle. Denying the Creator God, it gives human beings the ability to create reality. It's a government. Okay. Take a break. We'll get something, get some fresh air. We'll come back and see a little more video, presentation, and then we'll go to a video, hopefully.
Pastor Don, so Brian McLaren would be considered a postmodernist under a Christian.
Much of the emerging church is postmodern.
Yeah. Okay. I know there's different levels.
You're not exactly sure what Jesus is talking about. Matter of fact, you
No
can come
way.
and bring your Jesus and be just as
I
comfortable.
never seen it. Yeah, I just knocked Ava on it, so you win.
Oh, I just won.
Yeah, because like, he seems to be, I don't know a lot about him, but just like one book was I was looking at one time, it looked like he was really trying to push the idea that all religions are pretty well equal, which is the idea that there's no objective truth. You can come to God through any way, basically making your own reality. But so like that's like postmodern Christianity then, right? Which is obviously not true Christianity, but is that the Christian version of this?
If Jesus is the way, truth, and life, but the truth that Jesus is whatever you find him to be,
Right.
that opens the door then for all religions being the same, because you're all going to come to the same truth.
Right.
The truth isn't an absolute truth, but it's true to you.
That's true.
Just as my truth is true to me.
Right.
That's the new Jesus,
Okay. Okay.
which is a counterfeit
Yeah, that is.
of real.
I just hadn't really realized
And-
what the definition of postmodern
and-
and how.
My fear, our fear isn't, that's what it's going to do to these people thinking this way, because some of them may still be, honest to goodness what, true believers. But in thinking this way, in trying to get other people to come in and open the door to postmodernism, what is it going to do to the next generation? That's where the danger is, because they're going to start applying it to other scriptures all the way through. Okay?
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking about
Okay, good.
Uh,
All right, try and hook this up.
Real quick question, Pastor Norm,
Yeah.
about the paper. Is it possible to make it due Friday morning? Just because I personally didn't really understand postmodernism, and we're just talking about it today. And so me and Austin were both wondering if we could turn it in on Friday morning.
Let me think that through quick.
Okay.
I don't see why not. I'd rather have you learn something than hit a deadline.
Okay.
Okay, it's a different style of teaching, perhaps, a goal.
It's gonna be a little weird going to a different college.
You can apply this wherever you go.
Yeah.
Critical thinking.
I literally just learned so much from them. I have over a page.
Yeah,
I
I
pretty
know.
much just,
Yeah.
I had half a page this morning, like, when I found out I was due today. Last night I was freaking out so much I didn't do it. So this morning I had half a page, but I just had to completely scrap that, and I'm restarting my paper completely.
Yeah.
So.
I didn't really understand it. It's kind of hard to find on the internet.
Mhm.
I
Because
kind of
It is
had like
hard.
an understanding of it. I went to Summit and like, you know, like the lectures that they all reference by John Stone Street, I actually like got to listen to him. But like, just the stuff we
It's
learned in this class is kind of different from his take on it.
Well, there are different aspects, Austin, but once you get the core of it, you'll be shocked how many places it is, how many illustrations there are. The whole culture today is thinking that way, and it's crept into the church too. It's pretty insidious. Okay,
So-
we'll come back.
if that's, sorry, I just gotta ask one more question.
Go ahead.
If that's Satan's strategy of bringing postmodernism in, what, and I mean, it can clearly be seen in America. I didn't see it before, but now I can see it now. I mean, how do you reveal to people, especially Christians, that they are following the modernist view, and then also after they figure it out, you know, what happens to the nation after this continues to get projected? Like,
What happens to the nation and the whole world? You can smell a glimpse of it in Hitler's arena congresses with his youth. You have mass intellectual suicide, a mass non-thinking following of one person, and you get goosebumps. That's a pre-shadowing of the Antichrist that'll do it worldwide. Okay. All right, guys.
really setting up for the Antichrist.
like the dry skin from being nasty. Not having live stream on. Like, I use like Vaseline like for my lips, and honestly, it's better than any like actual chapstick I've ever used before. So.
Are those your own ones?
No, I don't know who's there, but they taste good.
Just take them.
Yeah. They're in the classroom. How's it going, Candy?
If you really, really want an example of counterfeits, Born This Way by Lady Gaga. So much modernism and twisting and relativism. Oh my goodness. If you need an example, that's it.
That's it.
Yep. I had to write a little report on that song for one of my worldview classes.
Gotcha.
So glad you gave us Friday because it was like, I wasn't understanding it really well. It's really confusing.
You know what? It is confusing. I don't blame anyone for not understanding this at all.
Yeah, yeah.
Here, Ben, smile. Knock a couple teeth out.
it the first time, and the second time the third, and then probably once it got to the really? Good habit, buddy.
Clay wants everyone's attention.
Alright, what do you gotta say, Clay? Say it.
I'm Clay!
I don't know if that's just you. There's quite a few people. Hello, Texas. Did those stones come from Texas?
Hey, Abby, if I got any bike right?
Oh, no, I'm ready. Yeah. That was wise, Julie.
Yeah, you don't look like
Oh,
this.
Pastor Don's coming.
Oh, very quick. Got about 3 seconds.
You just took off even more of the shredding. Not that it was there to begin with. You can see it. The scrape mark is like right here.
There's no way I made that connection.
Oh.
You did just say.
You would have to break in order for it to. Yeah, you did.
Wow.
Break the children's hearts? Yeah, great, fun. Favorite pastime?
I pulled my drawer.
I'll race you.
Yes, you're gonna be my girl. No, you can't change the rules.
False start.
Doing that.
Let's go, guys. You know, it's fun to be outside. You study outside all afternoon.
Oh, it's a little chilly.
You know what?
Oh,
I rebel. Shoes are not necessary.
Oh, yeah, they are.
No, they're not.
Okay.
Shoes are the bane of my feet's existence.
Oh, wow.
So,
Believe it or not, people don't have shoes and they figure.
What?
I can get your.
What'd you say?
I just
You
don't.
know what would happen to me if I
I
did
said there's
just.
lots of children in a lot of other places and they don't have
Yeah.
shoes and they get triggers.
Triggers? Smile now.
They're like these little
Yeah.
plugs that go in your teeth
Yeah.
or your skin.
No,
Yeah,
I thought triggers
those
are the ones
things
that
are
go
not
towards
easy
the
to write in mind. Did it
Ben, can you put me, you have the clicker?
you have a lot
Oh, I
of
got it.
them. I do that too.
They
All
do.
right,
They
gotta
do.
go, we're gonna go video, but
Like,
first I got
their
some
feet.
presentation for the screen.
Alright.
Okay, I've gotta
It
go,
should be HDMI 2.
where do I go?
No.
Hit the left arrow, and then hit OK.
Yours is
There you go.
embarrassing for both of us.
Okay, let me do this for you quick, and today's Thursday, so we'll have tomorrow yet to catch up on some of our videos if we don't quite get done tonight, and we'll probably do at least 45 minutes after supper tonight, because you don't have any final to get ready for tomorrow, so Monday instead.
So, Pastor Don, we've planned, for the past 2 weeks, we've tried to make a wings night work. We were going out to eat, the guys were. That's something that we really thought about for a while.
Yeah.
Is there?
Is that tonight?
Yeah, that's
I
the
think
We've
we
been
have
planning this for like
reservations.
6 weeks.
Yeah.
What time?
We canceled last week because we said that there was gonna be a video night for you, but
that didn't happen, so,
Okay, all right, I see.
just so you know.
I won't be here. Girls get extra points.
Is there any other options that we
It's
can
a
pursue?
joke, get points. It's a joke.
Or they
Okay? Not a sexies. Oh, I'm gonna
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
You said 45 minutes of video? I don't know, is anyone else having, I don't know, is there any way we can make it work with this afternoon?
How about if we went, how about if we started at 8:30 in the morning instead of 9?
Is that
Sure.
okay?
Yeah, it's
That
perfectly
works.
Or
fine.
work?
Okay, tomorrow morning?
I mean, we could do it Monday, but then you don't want to do it right before the final if you don't have to, so.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
8:30 tomorrow morning.
8:30 tomorrow. All right, let's do this here. Here we go. You've already covered this, the girls hinted to this, they actually went back to modernism. Let me back up just one step. Liberalism precedes modernism in this cyclic thinking that brings about postmodernism, okay? Liberalism had a question, or questions, plural, all previous forms of tradition. It opposed cultural norms of authority, and it came up with the idea that there was no supernatural. Remember Schaeffer talking about Albert Schweitzer and writing a book, the Historical Jesus. So it denies the reality of the supernatural. That will bring about the God is dead. That will bring about the idea that God doesn't exist in the form we think. And oddly enough, this is going to come from theologians. Okay. I'm not going to spend much time on that. I just want you to know as a precursor. It brought about, it almost died as soon as that's not true, as soon as it was presented. Because you say to somebody, there is no God. I mean, how silly for you to try and postulate that. The only way for you to be showing there's no God is to be equal to whatever God is, to be able to disprove that what he says about himself is not true. Like he is everywhere, so you can't be everywhere. He knows everything, so you have to know everything to say he doesn't exist somewhere in thought. And it didn't offer anything, people. They were only left there with the word God, and it leaves man cold and dry. And you'll see that if we finish up all the movies that I want you to see. Modernism, a notion that only science could explain reality. We can't find truth from the Bible, from God, because he doesn't exist, or he's dead, or our concepts about him are dead, then the answer that we're going to look for, we're going to try and find truth now in the real world, the scientific world. About 1900, or about 100 years ago, and one of the girls said, it's hard to pin the dates down. Well, this thing is like this, it's crossing over. It's crossing over. You have small segments of the thinking world being there, and then it becomes larger, and then it affects intelligentsia and the colleges, and universities, and the churches, and first the seminaries, and then the churches. The word modern throws people off immediately because you think of it as something today. If I said this is modern, you would assume I'm talking about something this afternoon or yesterday. But modern was a reference to this period of time about 100 years ago. Today it's considered as yesterday's way of thinking. So don't get confused about it. Just like that, you know, higher criticism, lower criticism. Lower criticism sounds like an evil one, and higher sounds like a better one, but it's inverted. So it has to do with this word modern. So just put it in its proper place. Postmodernism, then, is a dominant form of thinking in secular academic circles today. Today. It's a response to modernism, and thus a response to liberalism and all the other isms that those circles that Schaeffer drew brought us to. They have rejected modernism's absolute confidence in science as the way to truth. Science leaves us cold. It makes us a machine. We're part of a closed system. So it really can't bring enjoyment and satisfaction. It kills love. I mean, it's just human beings have less with modernism than more. They had less with liberalism than they had less with modernism. You could have called modernism post-liberalism, I suppose, but it hasn't been called that. We'll deal with the words that are being used today. It completely lost interest in truth. Truth as that comes from rational thought, truth that comes from the Bible, or truth that comes from God, or truth that comes from science. Postmodernism, in a sense, was ushered in by demonstrations, especially of young people, of just experiencing something that would have meaning. Even if it was so horrible, as Schaeffer pointed out, as demonic worship, Satan worship. At least it was something that you could experience. So postmodernism says there is no such thing as absolute, objective, or universal truth. It doesn't exist. Well, if something doesn't exist, you don't spend your time trying to find it anymore. All you're left with now is hoping that through ridding yourself of non-truth, of non-rational thought, somehow there will be reality and good experience. You can't even call it truth, as the girls pointed out. It begins to be hard to define. I want to mention this, I did earlier, just quickly here, because a offshoot of the foolishness of postmodernism is seen in Jacques Derrida. And again, it should be meaning, not mean. But meaning cannot be conveyed with language, with words. If you're consistent and there is no absolute truth, then words do not contain absolute truth. They never can, they never will, and words can change and meanings can change. Well, we know semantics can change. Sure, words and meanings can change. But he's going deeper than that. He's saying words by themselves cannot convey reality. So you have to deconstruct. He started this thing called deconstructionism, a newism. That you have to deconstruct what the other person says. So Zach speaks to me and I don't know what he means, because I can't presume that any of the words he used have absolute meaning. Thus, I can take his words, but as I receive his words to myself, I have to bring everything of my definition to those words, what I think they mean, and then I project that that's what he meant. Oh, I really can't even do that, because then that would be placing an absolute on him. What am I left with? His words have meaning to him, and the same words have a meaning to me, and they may be totally opposite, but that's okay. It doesn't matter, it's okay. Question, what does this do to communication? What is this going to do to relationships? Think about it. What does this do? It makes them impossible. So a wife says, until death do us part, and she means until I die, and the husband means until death do us part. That means until she decides that this thing has died, or I decide it has died. And so the relationship has no point of reference for reality. What does it do to contracts? Well, contracts, in the old days, when I bought this property, Mr. Cheney lived in the house to the right. I think it's been replaced now, the house out to the right. And he was an old guy. He wasn't a believer, but he lived in a Christian consensus. So I said, Mr. Cheney, do you want me to go to a real estate agent to type up our agreement? I offered him some money on the land, and he said, he laughed at me. Oh, Don. He said, if you feel better about it, you type it up, and I'll sign it. I agreed to buy the property on a handshake, so to speak. Wyoming is known, it's still known for that. You give a handshake, and that's your word. But you see, why would that be true? Because the words you use when you describe that have the same meaning to both of you. But once that's lost, what do you need now? Not just one attorney, but a bank of attorneys. And is that a guarantee that you're not going to go to court over it? No, not at all. So the courts are clogged. Attorneys are, all over the place, hanging in the trees. And we're paying all through the nose for these attorneys to make sure it is, what? In lock. And it never is in lock. I just talked to somebody yesterday, and our attorney told the church council last night, and our attorney for the church, and my attorney too, is handling a client right now where the employee is suing the owner of the company for copyright. Listen, you work for an employer, and on your job you have to come up with, say, advertising system. Whatever you do on time, whatever you do on the hour when he's paying you, who owns that? The employer owns that. He's suing the employer for the rights of what he did on the employer's dollar. You say that's absurd. The attorney said, I've never in my life ever seen this. Well, expect it. Because words have no meaning anymore. Relationships, contracts, politicians, all we're left with is what is, not with what we meant or what can be from what we say. So this is an attack on the unalterable, inerrant text concept that God doesn't lie. He's immutable. Everything winds up being going back to God as a counterfeit. That's what I mean going back to God as a counterfeit thing. And of course I poked fun at him, Dr. Ray, because if words have no meaning, how do you know what he means when he says that words have no meaning? The reason you understand what he's saying when he says words have no meaning is because words have meaning. But he's just destroyed his own argument. And I call this abstract, absurd insanity. There is no discussion anymore. Yes?
If I'm correct, he wrote at least one book on deconstruction.
He wrote one
He
book.
wrote a book on deconstruction. Words don't have meaning.
I see your
An entire
point.
book of words.
So, but why read it? Hey, here we are laughing at this. I think God does too. I think God has a sense of humor. And he says, you human beings think you're so wise you're going to replace me, and everything you touch dies and falls apart. When are you going to wake up? And he knows when we're going to wake up. As cultural, in the cultural arena, historical culture arena, he knows we're going to wake up. He's going to love it. He's going to allow it to come to full flower where the whole world is going to believe it. And then it'll implode when he comes. That's going to be fascinating. Modernism still had an interest in the question of whether basic convictions, beliefs, and ideology were objectively true or false. Postmodernism doesn't. It's not an extension of modernism, being post. It's a contradiction of modernism. Because modernism still had some interest in what truth was. It didn't go to the Bible. So in the 1920s and 30s, churches that went postmodern, and my good friend Earl Barnes from, was in our church, and a dear friend was home to Jesus now. His father, Earl was CEO of Dow International, and I met him at Rotary, and he says, I want to come to your church. He came with his wife to church, and they joined. And I'm sitting there with the church with children crying and babies and kids, and it was wonderful. And here's this, wow, intelligent, out in the worldly, hit the success level up here. And I thought, how's he going to accept this? Well, he loved our church because we believed in the truth. And he came from his father, who was not a pastor, but who was a layman in the church in Pueblo, Colorado, who fought modernism. It was a neat experience. Postmodernism sees reality as whatever the individual imagines it to be. What is true is determined subjectively by each individual person. There's no such thing as objective, authoritative truth that is over humanity universally. So it's all individual. It is every man did right in his own eyes. Right from Joshua in the Old Testament. You say, well, is that where it started? No. It started when God said to Eve, you can decide to be your own God. God said, don't eat it. He's holding out on you. He knows there's information, the different rational thought, but the truth is, you can eat it. You can decide what is right and what is wrong, starting from yourself. Now, she had experientialism. She saw that it was good for food. If she had humanism, it would make her wise. Okay. Right. If she had materialism, it's good food. I need to eat. So you see this early development of embryonic isms, even in that point. Modernism, postmodernism, sorry, it is pointless to debate if A, opinion A, is superior to opinion B. If reality is a construct of the human mind, if we decide what reality is, what truth is, then it's really pointless to get into a debate between A or B. This affects talk shows on TV. Because the talk shows aren't there for the purpose of arriving at truth. The whole purpose of the talk shows, two people arguing, is to experience the reality that they can both be true. One person's perspective of truth is ultimately equal as another's, or to another's, what they perceive to be reality. Can you imagine marrying somebody who is parallel in this thinking and who's, okay, what are you going to say in your vow? I vow to you my life and to marry you as your husband or wife, conditioned upon whatever I believe that means to me. Don't fall for that. Okay, you're in serious trouble. All right. By the way, they can't live in this world. Can they? Schaeffer's pointed that out to us. They can't live in this world. What are the effects of postmodern thinking? What are the effects? Well, it pursues a quest of truth, yes or no, true or false? No, there's no truth to pursue. So what's left is a quest of understanding of another person's point of view. You smell something here? What do you smell? A quest to pursue understanding. Let me finish this thought. Don't lose it. Words, truth, and understanding take radical new meanings. Understanding, to have this quest of understanding with each other, requires we first deny the possibility of knowing any truth of all. So I'm not trying to find out what you're not going to share with me. The whole issue of debate disappears in order to find truth. The whole issue of relationship of discussion disappears because there is no truth. The whole purpose of communication disappears in the old style communication to understand each other and to listen to each other. The purpose is not to find truth. It's just to come to the subset of we understand each other. What do you mean we understand each other? I understand what you think truth is to you. And I understand what truth is to me. And that's as far as you can go. Truth becomes nothing but a personal opinion, therefore to be kept private. What do I mean private? Oh, you can talk to me about it, but I want you to know it has no bearing on my life, and my truth has no bearing on your life. So there is no motivation now to really demonstrate whether it's true or not. I have to just take you at your word that it is true, because my world philosophy accepts it as true. Now, what does this lead to? Let me give you the word. Here we go. A new definition, of course you have a new definition of everything, a new definition of tolerance. And that's been brought up already in these reports, hasn't it? The old tolerance was to be gentle and kind to a person that had an opposing view to yours. But that's not the definition of tolerance today. The definition of tolerance today is, I accept your view as absolute truth for you. And thus you must accept my view of truth for me. What's that going to bring about? The total inhibition to imply in any way that what you're telling me I have to pay attention to because you're right. Is this going to affect education? Like Dr. Spock? Don't tell the child whether he's doing something right or wrong. You're going to hurt him. Let me take it the next step. Can a child then actually fail? Of course not. You're going to destroy the child. No, you're going to destroy postmodernism. I help the child, but I'm being facetious. So what's the new thing in sports? No one actually ever wins or loses. How can you say somebody wins or loses? They define what winning and losing is. You say, you think this is absurd? We've already laughed at it. How many times are we going to laugh at it? This is a comedy show. Is it workable? Well, as long as the child is cute to you and you can let him get away with it. But not when you're really living in a real world. I just went over and talked to my wife. She gave me some insight. I talked to Jared. He got some information on the insurance for the church. And then I hear this rumbling in the background. My wife says, oh, I'm turning 80 because Clay went up on the porch, crawled into the railing, and crawled out on the roof. Oh. And then yelled to his dad just so he could show his dad he could do it. There's a danger point between the railing on my porch and where the roof starts. My wife says, all of a sudden I'm 80. You took 10 years off my life. And pop-up, you can see my emotion right now. I can't let him decide what truth is because he lives in a real world with gravity, which is affected by 12 feet or 10 feet. Forgive me for a moment. I wonder what drives some of this. You know what I think drives some of this? Pride and arrogance of the parents. It's my child. He can take care of himself. Or, look at how avant-garde I am that it doesn't upset me. Can I take us up bunny trail? I'm going to harp on something here I'm going to get in trouble with. I might preach a little bit of this to the excommunication service, the graduation service. My mind is still disturbed to seeing a 5-year-old on the roof. We're going to quit early today, maybe 12:15, just for me to go talk and play. One more time. We may talk a little bit about this. I wonder why it is. Now, when I grew up, it was pretty safe to go to a secular school like high school, public school, and to college, because there was still pretty much influence of a Christian consensus. But that's not where the schools are anymore. They're of a postmodern consensus, a relativistic, humanistic, evolutionary consensus. And so I think the day is soon coming. 10 years ago, I was more gentler with public schools than I am this morning because the shift is taking place so quickly. And I think it's going to be pretty clear. Ken Ham is already leading the way on this, isn't he? Watch what happens to our children. I think the shift is coming within a short period of time, maybe 5, maybe 8 years, maybe sooner than that, but my mind says not quite that quick, where almost all Christian parents are going to say, I can't send my kids to a public school. I'm left with Christian schools or homeschooling or co-op. Taking my breath away. And I ask myself this, you know what I see as a pastor now, over 50 years in ministry, not just pastoring, but in ministry? And I typed this up yesterday, and I gave it to my wife, and I think I had this in the thing I gave to her, she read it. I said, is this a little caustic? She said, I don't think it's caustic. I ended the paragraph by saying, if the shoe doesn't fit, don't put it on, but this needs to be said. I wonder why it is that solid or Bible-believing Christians are so forceful in wanting their kids to go off to college to get a degree. Now, is going to college to get a degree a sin? Absolutely not. And if you want to be a nuclear physicist, you probably aren't going to learn that at Bob Jones University. You're probably going to have to go to a university. So special calling in life is going to still force you into the arena of a public arena that is anti-God. I know that. I'm a realist. But for 50 years, have watched parents do this. I mean, going back to my first years in youth ministry after moving. There was this, you gotta go to college. You gotta get a degree. You gotta get a good job. So you can have a family and a home. See, they had a false definition, a higher view of success, a lower view of success than a biblical view of what success is. There's nothing wrong. Whenever I say this, people think I'm anti-intellectual and anti-education. That's the first thing I always, they spit on me, they vomit on me, that all the time. And as soon as they do that, I know they're where they should not be philosophically. It's a giveaway. And I ask myself, why do parents do this? Only later to say, what happened? What happened to my kid? And if I wasn't so kind, I'd tell them. Or maybe if I was kind, I would tell them. You know what I think's driving it? Pride. Egotistical pride. Well, what does your son do? Well, he's discovering this or that. What does your son do? We assume he's always digging ditches, and that's not true. That's part of the lie. Well, my son is a manager in a business company or this and that, and wow, that's nice. You can just feel the pride oozing out of the secular world, because that's how the secular world thinks and lives. That's what success is. Matter of fact, they actually say it. Education is the hope of mankind. They actually believe that. What is that predicated on? Humanism. We're going to be able to answer our own questions. I'm not saying education is wrong. You know that, because what do Pastor Don believe? You ought to be a learner all your life. You never stop, because it's God's world and His creation. That's a totally different motive. I want my kids to be all they can be. And so many of the kids in our Christian academy years ago, the parents had this view. And they had to send their kids off to college. If you need to go to college, go to college. You can pick a Christian school with foundation of the biblical understanding that teaches intellectually good documentation of the natural world, then go there. Don't go to a secular school just because it's free. But the parents don't see that. And so they pressure their young people. And then 5 years later, 10 years later, what happened? What happened? A higher percentage of divorces in those families, a higher percentage in leaving the church, a higher percentage of moving into now the church today, by survey. Young people in the church today are postmodern. They've been assimilating this culture around them, and they don't believe the Bible's true anymore, and there aren't any absolutes anymore, and it all depends on the situation. Where'd they get this from? Well, perhaps from a weak church to start with, but I wouldn't blame it all on the church. This incredible pride and arrogance of my kid's going to do this. Now, please, don't hear. I mean, Alexa's going to go, and I hope you don't are embarrassed when I say you got a job at Mayo Clinic on cancer research. I have 2 kinds of cancer, or had. I can't tell you how excited I am for you. Are we all excited for her?
Yeah.
I pray God will give her intelligence. Start with God and not end with Him. You know, it may just be that someday the cure for cancer may inexorably link to some biblical principle somewhere from the curse. Wouldn't that be a novel thought? Okay? So blessings on you. And I see kids hurt and I see parents hurt. And I look at that, and so I make the statement. It needs to be said. If the shoe doesn't fit for you, don't put it on. But it needs to be stated. And I look at my daughter going through high school, and my daughter Annie, who doesn't finish college. She doesn't have a degree. So I guess she's less of a person. Not in my heart. She is a joy. She's raising children who are going to love Jesus. She is a joy. I'd trade her over a doctor of physics any day if that doctor of physics meant that she had left her God. If she can be a doctor of physics and keep her God, great. Amen. We need doctors. We need more attorneys, young people. We need more Christian attorneys. We need more Christian scientists. But I trade my Holly. I had dinner with her, took my secretaries to lunch yesterday rather, and I looked at her and she's beautiful. Just a beautiful woman. I think she is an example for other women. And she's still young. I wouldn't trade her. And Scott and Holly raised their 2 daughters with all their problems of humanness, which I have too. And I wouldn't trade it. Wouldn't trade it. Because my goals are different. My ultimate goals of success and definitions of success are different. And so I throw this at you. I know I'm dumping on you. I just throw this at you, and I want you to think it through. You're going to raise children. Set your priorities and your boundaries. Help them be all that they can be. And if they can get a cure for cancer, praise God. I mean that. But if God calls them to raise a family, I would, in a godly fashion, I would suggest to you that is pretty a high calling of God, isn't it? Amen? Whew. Well, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad I have the privilege of being with you to talk about these things. All right. Postmodernism demands we are not to think. We're not going to have any video today anymore. Postmodernism demands, here's what it demands. We are not to think we know any objective truth. Every opinion should be shown equal respect, a new kind of tolerance. It comes across as desiring harmony and tolerance, but a new kind of harmony and tolerance. The new harmony and tolerance is based on the fact that we all hold the same view, that you can believe whatever you like. So when President Trump today said the church, he said, I'm going to back the church. The IRS is not going to go after churches. They're off limits. Church pulpits can preach what they want, including Muslims in non-church. But then, you know, I think that that's true. I believe that part. I want to be careful, though, of assuming then, just because we have these rights in America, pluralism, that we're not going to move it into neo-pluralism and start assuming everybody's view is equal. Equal in acceptance of allowance under the law, but not equal in reality and truth. You with me? So, we're on guard. Can I give you 15 seconds free? I can't prove this. I had dinner on 2 nights ago with a young couple whose dad is right now in Washington, D.C., probably at the prayer breakfast there. He has influence. He talks, he's a friend of Pence, Vice President Pence, and they were told by Mrs. Pence this story. This is what passed on to me secondhand, thirdhand now. That every time the plane landed whenever the Trumps were with the Pences at a rally, as soon as he was the president-elect, that stopped. They don't travel together anymore on a plane. You know why. Mm-hmm. But when they travel together, the Pences always pray together before they land. And the president noticed that. Get goosebumps. I don't know where the man is, but he sure isn't, at least at this point, running away from God. He may present a God that isn't there in the Bible. Oh, that would be sad. But he walked over to them, put his arm on one of them and said, can we pray together? And they started praying together before they landed. I saw, you want to watch something spooky? You watch him when he comes out from this. He's the last one to walk onto the stage at the swearing-in ceremony. And they showed him in the hall. And you can see the weight that was about to descend on him descending. You can see it in his face. And a few days later, he was interviewed by a talking head. And he said, there's something, he talked about that, there's something that happens when all of a sudden you realize where you are. And the word we got 2 nights ago was, this morning I got the word, that someone made the statement, I think it was Vice President Pence, that this man is a true believer. it's possible he's trusted Christ. I pray that's true for him. I pray it's true for us. If it is, it's a breath of fresh air. Okay. The new type of postmodern influence, there's a new one. It's evolving. Why? Because the old postmodernism isn't going to answer the heart's desire for meaning and purpose and value and love. And the virtual reality, well, that's what we call it here at the school. I'm still listening, in a sense, to what the real people ahead of me are out there, you know, the talking heads of Christendom. And I'm not making fun there. There are some very gifted, much more than I am. So I'm listening to see what they're going to call it. Here we've chosen the word virtual reality, VR. Virtual reality is a term that applies to virtual reality, is a term that applies to computer simulated environments that can simulate places in the real world as well as in the imagination world, imaginary world. So virtual reality is a technological advanced thing where you can actually, you put on goggles or something happens in an environment where you create a counter world which is just real as virtual real, as real as the real world, virtual reality. Virtual reality is an artificial environment that is created with software and presented to the user in such a way that the user suspends belief and accepts it as real environment. That's their definition. I just watched something the other day. I should have copied it to show you. But they were talking about finding truth and the world we live in, and it was a secular thing as far as I remember. And all of a sudden, they had a room full of young people with these headsets on. They were actually identifying the technological ability to virtual reality, to the real world. And I hinted at this last fall. You think of how far this could go. Well, the danger of Dungeons and Dragons, people got upset about that. Why? Because the young people got into it such an in-depth way that through their imagination, that became more real than the actual world they live in. So they got their meaning and purpose and value from that. So they actually are so addicted to it, they lose the ability to function in the real world. And you've got a psychosis. That is also driving the current fear today of the social media world. Because you say things on the internet, in what do you call that? Not just Facebook, but texting. You already say things to your friends that you would never say to them face to face. Because you're insulated, why? From what from? The real world. Sounds like it's opening people up to share. Careful. We're not exactly sure what it's going to do yet to human beings. There's some tremendous presentations on this right now. MacArthur's done one that I had not yet heard, but the guy said it was, the guys who went down said it was spectacular. Okay. There's a new type of postmodernism, a new influence in postmodernism. Get Real, a philosophical adventure in virtual reality by 1998 by Philip Zide, wherein the idea of VR is pushed to its logical extreme and ultimate possibility. According to Zide, virtual reality could be made to have an ontological status equal to that of the actual reality. So now I'm not going to get, I can find reality / maybe truth, even though it doesn't supposedly exist, allowing me to go anywhere to try and find it, even in non-reality. That now I can predicate my whole life on what I'm able to imagine. And as I said in the previous session, I get goosebumps. This is the final insult of God, is claiming that we are equal to Him in being able to be creator gods. That we can create our own world. As real as His. And therefore we can project its outcome. You said, God, if we deny you death, no. We're going to redefine our own world, and our world doesn't have death in it. And they actually believe it. They actually believe it. That they can keep God from scattering them. Okay, you're all familiar with this. Or the KVR. Virtual space. And I think I showed you this. Didn't I show you this earlier?
To top up your omega-3 DHA, you could lead the life of the Inuit Eskimo. Their omega-3 rich diet has contributed towards their healthy lives.
You want to see it again?
Yeah.
It's like the lizard.
So
funny.
Oh, is it on?